Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X research and professional physicist. Today I'd like to talk to you about another one of my articles. This one is entitled The Planet X System and Volcanoes Reveal that the Universe is Electrical. And volcanic activity, as we know, is associated to earthquakes. And since earthquakes are likely to be electrical in nature, it's not surprising that the fact that the Earth is an electrical body can also be perceived from the electromagnetic phenomena seen during volcanic eruptions. And we see that in this image. We see a volcanic eruption, we see lava spewing from a volcano, we see ash, and we see lightning associated with this event. So we're going to start by looking at the Earth and earthquakes, and the first diagram shows us the different layers within the Earth, the inner core, the outer core, the mantle, and the crust, which is only about 100 kilometers in depth. And each of these has its own width. The inner core is only 800 miles in radius, and then the outer core, which is liquid and made out of iron, and both the inner and the outer core believed to be made out of solid iron. And then we have the mantle, and these widths are given here, and the temperatures. The temperature, of course, drops as we move away from the center of the Earth towards the surface. Now, earthquakes happen mostly at points inside the Earth where the Earth is fractured. And these are points called fault lines. And since all objects in the universe seem to start out hot, with the exception of stars, which remain hot, and these objects cool down over time. So the Earth's surface probably started out as hot liquefied rock, and probably at the same temperature as the inner core. Then over time that top layer of rock cooled, solidified, and formed a solid rocky crust. And this process would have led to one continuous layer of solid rock without fractures in it. So the fact that the Earth is now fractured, as we can see in this image, which shows the largest fractures in the Earth's crust, and these are called tectonic plate boundaries. So the fact that the Earth is fractured indicates that the Earth went through some cataclysmic event which led to this fracturing. Now the fact that the Earth is fractured also makes it possible for magma, which is hot liquefied rock, which obviously must come from the liquid core, to make its way to the surface, and it makes its way through these fractures. So we know that the Earth must have fractures deep inside it. When this hot liquefied rock, which we call magma inside the Earth, and which we call lava once it meets the atmosphere, makes its way to the surface, and this is associated, of course, with the fact that the Earth is fractured. But what actually causes the fractures in the Earth's crust and mantle? And what kind of cataclysmic event led to it? Now, the whole planet is covered in fractures, but we also have fractures deep within the mantle. And whatever event therefore occurred would have had to cause the fractures in the mantle and in the crust. And also we know that we have fractures deep within the Earth because we often have deep earthquakes. And deep earthquakes are earthquakes that are at a depth greater than 100 kilometers, because this is the width, the maximum width of the mantle. Now, earthquakes are associated to the ionization of the Earth's ionosphere, and these create currents, which then induce currents via Faraday's law in the Earth's interior. And I believe that this is whatever cataclysmic event happened must have induced this fracturing of the Earth deep inside, and therefore is associated to these deep earthquakes that must have happened at that time. most of the cataclysmic events that could possibly have happened, including an asteroid impact, would not have caused the whole crust and mantle to break down, especially causing deep fractures within the Earth. So it had to be something that can happen deep within the Earth without it having to be transmitted through the surface. And what happens is currents can be induced deep within the Earth via Faraday's law. So they don't have to be transmitted from the surface downwards. So this is why when the Earth's magnetosphere is impacted by a CME, which is a coronal mass ejection, or fast solar wind, or even higher density of ionized solar particles, earthquake activity increases, because earthquakes are electrical in nature, and they are caused by a type of subterranean lightning. Now we see as well that earthquakes are electrical in nature through the electrical phenomena associated with the earthquakes, and I have written an article about this before. And so these earthquakes cause lights in the atmosphere, sometimes days before these earthquakes. And these, we know, are also associated with the ionosphere. So when the ionosphere is greatly ionized, it would induce currents on the surface and inside the Earth. And we often see huge earthquakes follow these solar events. And then we also see these electrical phenomena. We know they are electrical. We see strange lights in the skies. And this happened before the Japanese 7.4 magnitude earthquake on November 22nd, 2016. This was actually a few days before the earthquake. Now, what else happens is that transformers blow up, and this was during the Mexico City magnitude 8.1 earthquake. And because transformers blow up and we see lights in the sky, some people say that it is the fact that the transformers are blowing up that is leading to this phenomena of lights. But yet we have to remember that this is not actually a logical deduction, because these lights have been reported since before there were any transformers around. And also the fact that they happened days before the earthquake, not just when the earthquake is happening, shows us that that is an incorrect logical deduction. The correct logical deduction is that both events, the lights and the transformers blowing up, are associated to the same thing. And that same thing is the ionization of the ionosphere due to energetic solar events like CMEs and solar flares. So these lights appear and they are therefore electrical in nature, because they can be produced by induced currents, just like the transformers blow up because they are induced currents in the electrical lines, and these transformers can only handle so much electrical current. When that goes above the limit, they blow up. That is quite logical. So if we have induced currents in these wires, we would have induced currents inside the Earth wherever there is an area where current can easily be conducted. It is the same thing. It's basically an electrical wire produced by metals within the rocky Earth. So we have now a logical connection between these two events, which shows us that earthquakes are electrical in nature. But now, why is the Earth's ionosphere increasingly more ionized? And again, I have written about this many times. The reason is that the sun's increased activity is due to the fact that it is increasingly being destabilized by the system of stellar cores, or brown dwarf stars, that have clustered around the sun. And these objects are provoking the sun through the magnetic connection to have stronger and stronger X-class flares and huge full halo CMEs. So the presence of large stellar cores close to eruptive regions on the Sun usually indicates this. We actually see these objects often and more nowadays close to where we see large CMEs happening or solar flares. As we can see here, this is a large stellar core actually being highlighted by the CME plasma. And we see a smaller one here also being highlighted by the plasma. They obviously solid spherical objects. And I have written about these many times. So these are coronagraph images. This one is from Stereo A. It's a Core 2 image from September 13th, 2017. And this one is a cactus, which is of course based on the LASCO C2 coronagraph. And coronagraphs are designed to show CMEs erupting from the Sun, and we now see these spherical objects within the CMEs. So the CME plasma is making the presence of these objects known to us. And because they seem to be with these objects so many times, the logical conclusion is that they are actually provoking the Sun into these events. But this is not the only connection. We also know, and I have observed these objects from the beginning, that they make a magnetic connection with the Sun. And through this magnetic connection, they give rise to coronal holes, and they give rise to actually having plasma being drawn from the Sun towards these objects. And they've been photographed doing that, and this is of course what connects them to white dwarfs as well, besides other things, but I just cannot go into all of it here. So white dwarfs are connected to these objects, the difference being that these objects emit infrared radiation rather than strong visible light like white dwarfs, because they are weaker and have aged beyond the white dwarf phase. And in my previous article I explained how these objects evolve from main sequence stars to red giants to white dwarfs down to the brown dwarf star stage, or what I call now stellar cores. But at least when they arrive at the Sun, they don't emit visible light, they emit infrared radiation. But they go through a rejuvenation process, and in that process they absorb light energy and plasma from the Sun, and eventually they are able to emit light. At least it seems so, because they become light sources in our sky and are able to illuminate our atmosphere and create pink, orange and red sunsets, which are not normal for our planet and can only be produced by light sources that emit this kind of light. This of course explains why an infrared telescope like the Iris telescope or the James Webb, which is being prepared now, is necessary to those who know the truth but refuse to speak about it to the public, because only such a telescope can be used to observe these objects as they come in towards the Sun. And here we have an image. This is a 211 angstrom wavelength SDO image showing a spherical object in the Sun's corona, and obviously connecting and making this plasma connection. We see plasma now moving from or being drawn by the object from the Sun, and along the returning field lines will be plasma from this object returning to the Sun. And this type of plasma connection has to be induced by the magnetic field. These objects also seem to have strong magnetic fields because they, when they rejuvenate, they produce a very large plasma loops. And these were one of the first things that are observed in the stereo images last year when I started looking for them. And so this image is from September 27th, 2017, and what gives away these objects being in the sun's corona nowadays to me is actually seeing the plasma connection that they create with the sun. And of course we sometimes also see this spherical structure there, which indicates the presence of an and the size of the object that is drawing plasma from the sun. So the sun's increased activity, which is being provoked into, increases the induced currents, and these induced currents will induce the electrical potential at the points where they are generated, and that is within the Earth. Now, the increase in potential difference between 2 points will increase the chance of a lightning bolt occurring between the 2 points. Lightning is what is termed a breakdown and will occur between two capacitor plates or two charged spheres when the potential between them gets to a point where the material between the plates, which is not a good conductor like air, reaches a limit at which it is forcefully ionized, so it becomes a plasma, and this leads to sudden and violent conduction across that medium. So we would observe in that case a spark or a lightning bolt connecting the two plates. And so in order to have lightning occurring, we need material between 2 points where there is a large potential difference not to be a good conductor. And the rock in the Earth's interior has varying conductivity. Some is a good conductor, some is not. It depends on the minerals present in the rocks. So when the rock between the region where the current is induced and the Earth's core is not a good conductor, the charge will build up until there is a breakdown, at which time lightning conduction occurs between the induced current region and the core. So this is why the area above the ground may experience unusual ionization effects days before an earthquake, and these ionization effects are, of course, lights, and these are due to the associated electric fields building up, because whenever we have current building up, we have electric fields building up. Charge produces, of course, an electric field, and so the electric field will build up in that region, and it will actually ionize the air above the surface of the ground. Here we see the spark occurring between two charged spheres, and what happens is these are connected to a power supply, and the potential difference is increased across them until eventually it becomes so large that the breakdown occurs, and the breakdown we observe as the spark, or it's the same as a lightning bolt. So when a lightning bolt strikes, it breaks up the rock in that area, and experiments have been done to show that indeed lightning breaks rock. So it's not surprising that rock beneath the Earth breaks up when subterranean lightning occurs. The breaking of rock will cause a shock wave to travel from the point where the lightning struck. And these shock waves are experienced as seismic waves and are the equivalent of thunder when lightning occurs in the Earth's atmosphere. So the point where the subterranean lightning strikes is actually called, in my diagram here, the epicenter of the earthquake. And this diagram illustrates what I have just mentioned. We have the core of the Earth. It's made out of iron, it's a very good conductor. And we have the liquid core. And then we have the ionosphere, so this is the Earth's atmosphere. And we have currents in the ionosphere, and these are made of ionized particles, which are ionized by events happening on the sun, solar flares, CMEs, reaching the Earth's surface, or not the Earth's surface, the magnetosphere, going through the magnetosphere, getting into the atmosphere, impacting atmospheric particles, and these can then become ionized, and they move across and create a current. These currents then induce currents on the surface of the Earth, and these would lead to transformers blowing up when they get large enough, and they would induce currents within the Earth, in the mantle, or even in the crust. And these currents, if there is material between these points, and these are usually points where these currents are induced over and over again. So these are usually areas that have been fractured before by earthquakes, which are due to these currents occurring. So these are the weak areas, which are most probably also areas where there is metals that are conducting. So these would be fractured areas, and there is probably iron in these in veins of rock, producing, creating therefore these induced currents. So if there is then not a lot of conduction between these points and the areas where the Earth's core is, where the Earth's electric potential is built up, then the charge will build up over time until eventually the build up gets to the point where there is a breakdown. And a breakdown would mean that there would be a lightning bolt coming from the core to the point where the currents are occurring, and where there is a charge buildup. So we would see this lightning, and wherever the lightning strikes, we have increased breakdown of the rock. Sorry, I just moved that by mistake. And so we would have a break of a fracturing, increased fracturing of the rock, and we would also have a seismic wave traveling from that point. And sometimes the rock moves violently. It may slip if it was under pressure, and all that can occur because of this lightning strike. So then the seismic wave will travel from this point due to the shock wave. It's basically a seismic wave is a shock wave due to the impact that occurs when the lightning strikes at that point. And therefore this point where the lightning struck is called the epicenter of the earthquake. Now the fact that the Earth is fractured across its whole surface and far below the surface is indicative of some event in the past, as I mentioned before, which caused a huge amount of lightning. So now we know that whatever event happened must have caused subterranean lightning inside the Earth. And so a couple of events would fit that. But we already know that what is causing them right now is these stellar cores that are destabilizing the sun. And we know that these stellar cores have led to this dramatic increase in earthquake activity inside the Earth. So the two are now associated. So it's indicative that whatever happened to the Earth in the past must have been similar. Some object going through the solar system, which caused induced currents, which caused ionization of our atmosphere, which possibly affected the sun and led to these earthquakes. So this has occurred in the past, and it led to the Earth breaking up. And now it's happening again, except that now the Earth is already broken and full of weak points, so which are of course prone to further breaking. And these points must also be points that are more prone to developing these induced currents, as I have mentioned. So they probably, the rocks there are rich in iron ore. And again, we see another diagram showing a volcanic eruption, and we see volcanic lightning. And we cannot forget that what we are seeing is rock. This is liquid rock spewing from the earth. And the fact that we see lightning happening across points in this rock shows us what actually can happen underneath the surface of the earth. This, don't forget, is rock. So whether it's in liquid form or solid form, it can produce lightning discharges. It's just that when it's above the surface of the earth, we can actually see the lightning discharges. But when it's inside the earth, we don't see it. We only feel its effects, which are fracturing rock and earthquakes. So we know that fractured rock is also prone to volcanic eruptions, because every lightning bolt will break the rock more, and any shift of the fractured rock will possibly allow magma to find its way to the surface, or it may even unseal chambers and that were formed before in the case of a dormant volcano. But increased earthquake activity, which is, as I have mentioned, caused by subterranean lightning, to unseal it, and therefore the volcano becomes active again and lava appears on the surface. So this ties earthquake and volcanic activity. But as I mentioned, the volcanic activity in itself shows what is possible and what seems to be happening under the earth. It's these bolts of lightning. They can happen to the rock when it's on the surface so we can see it, and it happens when we cannot see it. And it happens due to this build-up of charge and possibly the magma not being a very good conductor. There are sometimes volcanic eruptions where we do not see any lightning, and this is due probably because that magma is made out of material which is a better conductor. And when magma is a better conductor, so it would have more iron ore possibly in it, then there is no need for a lightning to occur, because the magma will conduct the charges very quickly from one point to another. So this buildup of induced current must occur on the surface when we have a volcanic eruption, and it leads to lightning, and it must therefore also happen underground when it's out of sight. Now, Planet X is the name of the planet that Dr. Harrington gave it before he went to New Zealand to find it. He actually wrote articles about Planet X. And he specifically went to New Zealand with his 8-inch telescope in order to find it. And he was a family man, and we know that no sane man would leave his family behind and make the long trip to New Zealand looking for an object that he didn't believe existed. No, I don't think so. Now, the question is, would he still be alive instead of dying in the most suspicious of manners, because he developed an extremely fast-growing cancer, whilst he was actually very healthy. He just had a physical before he went to New Zealand, and he was in the best of health. So the fact that he died is extremely suspicious, and I would suppose that he was actually killed. So would he be killed if he actually had found nothing? No, I don't think so. I think that what he found was actually extremely dangerous, and it has become the greatest cover-up in the history of our modern world. And it has involved every facet of human existence, from the educational system, which has been dumbed down, to the way that scientific research is carried out, which is publish or perish no matter what, no matter whether what you publish is of any actual leads to any actual advance of physics. Most of the time, it leads to a retardation of our understanding of the physical universe, to the entertainment which trains minds to not think and not see. So the system which Dr. Harrington found is now here. It is affecting our sun and our planet, and I have been writing about it for many months. I started out by simply seeing the sky and that it did not look normal. The colors in the sunsets were not what is normal for our planet. And that's how my research started. And I have found much evidence to tell me that these objects are here, they are around the sun, and they are associated with the system that Dr. Harrington found, and he called it Planet X. So in his honor, I'd like to continue to call it the Planet X system. Now, at the same time, the Planet X system is also revealing the truth to those who want to understand, which is that we are living in an electrical universe, not a gravitational one. So in conclusion, the Earth is an electrical object in an electrical universe. Earthquake and volcanic activities associated to subterranean lightning, which is in turn associated to what the stellar cores around the sun brought in by the Planet X system. This is Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X physicist. Thank you for watching.